Welcome back to the CIB Presidential Seminar Series that we broadcast from Purdue University. And as you all know, the theme for this semester is Distinguished Women Researchers in the Built Environment. And today we have a very special guest, a very distinguished colleague, Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga. Let me give a quick background before I hand it over to Professor Amaratunga for her seminar. So Dilanthi Amaratunga is a leading international expert in disaster resilience with an extensive academic career. She's a professor of disaster risk reduction and management at the University of Huddersfield, that's in UK, and is the head of its Global Disaster Resilience Center. She has a PhD in construction management from Salford, BSc honors in quantity surveying from Sri Lanka, a fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and a fellow of the Chartered Manager of the Chartered Management Institute, also in UK. Dilanthi's research focuses on preparedness for disaster response, recovery, and reconstruction, early warning and communication, disaster resilience of cities, and built environment dimension of climate change and sustainability. Dilanthi is recognized for her career-long impact up until 2023 and is placed among the global top 2% of influential scientists, according to the report of composite citation metrics by Elsevier and as well as Stanford University in USA. As I said, we are in for a treat today. So please welcome Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga. Dilanthi, over to you.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mark, for that introduction. And also thank you very much for inviting me to, or asking me to do this talk. And as I said before, I quite enjoyed actually getting myself prepared to this session in reflecting on what has happened during the last several years, for example. So just kind of a bold statement that I want to sort of say here. Earthquakes don't kill, but the poorly constructed buildings do. So this actually sort of, I will actually explain this statement in bit more detail as we go along. So just to sort of reflect, this was actually very up-to-date statistics from World Economic Forum. Current risk landscape, global risk for 2024. And of course, I think it is fair to sort of say that we are at a turning point. So you can actually sort of see the number one. I don't think you will be surprised to see this. The number one risk that we are facing is actually the extreme weather. So this was actually published very, very recently, about a week ago. And then in terms of ranking them by severity over the short to long term, as you can sort of see, 2 years, the weather events is at number 2. And if you sort of consider the 10-year period, it is actually at number 1. So again, needless to say, the importance of disasters in our overall circumstances. And if you sort of take the number of recorded natural hazards events from 1900 to 2023, this is actually a very, very good data set. And I'm glad that I managed to locate it. So you can actually sort of see the trend has been the number of recorded natural hazards on the increase from 1900 to 2023. And if you sort of do the same mapping based on the hazard type, but the statistics are now from 1970 to 2023, you can sort of see the distribution of natural hazards. It ranges from droughts, floods, earthquakes, and other extreme weather events, and so on and so forth. So if you sort of actually talk about the disaster losses due to natural hazards, of course, it is fair to sort of say that they are on the increase. So it is said that the disaster loss calculation for 2023, again, very much up-to-date statistics, is US dollars 250 billion. With more than 74,000 fatalities. And you can sort of see the size of that when I sort of say this. It is actually roughly equals to the entire GDP of either New Zealand or Portugal. And thunderstorms in North America and Europe were more disruptive than before. And also you can actually sort of see the insurance figures here, US dollars 95 billion, which is actually very close to the 5-year average, but it is about the 10-year average. So in that sense, I suppose the number of disasters and also the disaster-related losses are quite an important point for us to consider. And if you sort of say the losses due to natural hazards are increasing definitely, as I already emphasized, and this is actually kind of a world map for 2023. So the earthquake in Turkey and Syria was the 2023's highlight, and it was the most devastating humanitarian disaster. And also add to that, 2023 was the hottest year ever recorded, with a large number of regional records broken, as we all know. So with that in mind, I suppose, I just wanted to sort of highlight the current risk landscape, which I've already, I hope that I managed to give you a kind of a rough idea about it. And then I will actually move on to the natural hazards impact on the built environment, and then reflect on the case of the construction sector. And then I wanted to put forward this notion which I want to identify as disaster resilience for future of construction, and how we can actually position DRR within the built environment. So I suppose this week is actually quite an important one, because we actually sort of marked the first anniversary of the Turkey earthquake. But I'm sure you have actually sort of then have seen this sort of media outlets demonstrating various points. Of course, just to sort of reflect in Turkey during the aftermath of Turkey earthquake, around 37,000 buildings collapsed, with over 200,000 buildings heavily damaged, and also sort of around 53,000 lives were lost. So, but within the backdrop of that, you have actually, I'm sure you have seen these media cutouts sort of saying, Turkey's earthquakes show the deadly extent of construction scams, and Turkey widens probe into building collapses as quake toll exceeds 50,000. So these are actually quite a frequent sightings for us during the last year. And again, I have actually picked up some of the points from the media. Sort of say the plan was to actually build 319,000 safe homes, but having said that, the Turkey's construction sector is actually struggling. And the number of newly constructed houses are nowhere near this number. And also sort of, it is estimated that overall cost of the earthquake damage to Turkey at more than $103 billion. But having said that, so far, the reconstruction effort has fallen well short of that mark. And critics say that there's a cause for concern about both the pace and the quality of the reconstruction. So this is actually quite an important point, bearing in mind the topic of today's talk. So in that sense, it is actually, I think as far as earthquakes are concerned, they are a natural phenomenon. Just it happens, but the consequences of the earthquakes are quite administrative in this particular instance. Better buildings could have saved lives in Turkey earthquakes. I think we all actually believe that. And you can actually sort of see this image that I actually took a screenshot from the BBC. You can see either side of the collapsed building, certain other buildings are still, you can see them clearly, but whereas the one in the middle has completely collapsed. So yes, the developers and contractors likely were negligent, perhaps, constructing buildings with cheap materials or designs that could not withstand this particular 7.8 magnitude earthquake. As we know, Turkey is investigating and has arrested some contractors, but the entire political and economic system is implicated, as we all know. If we sort of move on from Turkey to Indonesia, so Palu, Indonesia earthquake in 2018. So this actually sort of had this actually sort of the damage due to Palu earthquake was amounting to $658 million. And it was actually one of the costliest disasters to have hit Indonesia in the last 5 years. So in the map, you can actually sort of see the location of Palu, very close to the island of Papua. And of course, more than 65,000 houses, hotels, and public buildings were damaged or destroyed due to this particular earthquake. And not only that, the Honolulu Bridge in Palu was collapsed. So you can actually sort of see to your left-hand side the bridge linking two major islands. It is actually a key piece of infrastructure in the city, but it was completely destroyed, as you can see from the right-hand side image. So I suppose, one of the leading geologists from Indonesia actually commented, expect more of the same to be perfectly cynical. I think it actually summarizes the impact of this problem. And very briefly to sort of then reflect on the Tohoku earthquake, getting back to 2011. So again, you can actually sort of see the map of Japan here, and the main quake was actually the 9 points at the Richter scale. It actually occurred on the 11th of March 2011. And many government officers and the researchers actually say Tohoku earthquake is actually unthinkable, and I'll tell you why. So you can actually sort of see again the map of one of the Japanese islands you can sort of see, and this particular city is actually Miyako City. So this was actually the height was 7.3 meters, and the first wave was actually 2 minutes, and the highest wave was actually after the 35 minutes, and this was actually before the tsunami, and this was after the tsunami. So you can actually sort of see the destruction to the buildings and the infrastructure. So another example, this is actually, you can actually sort of see in the map the location of the city called Soma in Japan, and this was actually after the tsunami. So as we all know, the Japanese government actually, their preparedness plans are world leading, and this is actually what they actually their typical planning process is. They do planning according to 3 scenarios based on the deaths and people missing, destroyed houses, and the economic loss. And this is actually what happened with the 2011 earthquake. So you can actually sort of see it actually passed all the predictions that they did, scenario A, B, and C, even totaling together. So I think it is fair to say, in that sense, the time for establishing solutions to these complex emerging challenges is now. And of course, the UN has highlighted that the more governments, the UN agencies, the organizations, businesses, and civil society, they need to be working together and need to be better equipped to save, to mitigate disasters when they strike and to save more lives. So if we sort of move on to the case of the construction sector, of course, needless to say, I'm stating the obvious here. The construction sector is of strategic importance across the world. It delivers the buildings and infrastructure needed by the rest of the economy and society. And not only that, the construction value chain includes a wide range of economic activities, going from the extraction of raw materials, the manufacturing and distribution of construction products, up to design, construction, management, and control of construction works and so on and so forth. So just to reflect on the size of the construction sector, so this is actually the snapshot of the UK construction sector. The market size in 2022 was £473.5 billion. And there were 170,000 people attracted to the center. And it contributes to 7% of the GDP. And also not only that, it provides a significant multiplier effect to the wider economy. And also it consumes, on the negative side, 40% of the UK energy, half of our water and a quarter of all the raw materials. So, but having said that, despite 2023's economic uncertainty, the long-term forecast is actually good. And it is predicted that 225,000 additional workers needed to keep pace with demand. So again, with that in mind, the construction, it is also predicted that the construction forecast for the UK to increase to 476.6 billion until 2023. And out of that, the construction of buildings is forecast to be 239 billion pounds. And of course, very recently published, this was published on the 2nd of February, 2 weeks ago, the policy paper published by the UK government. And it is anticipated that there will be 660 projects and programs across the public sector that are in the pipeline. And also 164 billion pounds planned for investment by 2024-25 cycle. So from the UK scenery, if you sort of move on to the EU construction sector, it is actually a more gradual territory. As you can sort of see, there have been a dip due to corona pandemic, the construction output, but it is now in the increase. So from the point of view of construction output, the construction market size attained a value of approximately 2,752 billion US dollars in 2023. These are actually the very latest figures. And it is expected that it will go up to 4,233 billion US dollars by 2032. Okay, how can I actually forget the construction industry in the US, bearing in mind the host to this session is actually based there. So it is actually sort of said that the market size of the US construction sector was valued at around 2.1 trillion US dollars in 2022. But a decrease is predicted in the next couple of years, but again with an increase in residential, non-residential and non-building segments with a forecast growth again in 2026. So with that, what I want to sort of, okay, I discussed about the risk landscape, and then discuss about the case for the construction sector. So how can we actually link the two together? So the point that I want to emphasize here is this concept called disaster resilience for future construction. Yeah? So the Future of Construction Initiative, for example, highlighted that there is a compelling need for the engineering and the construction industry to create resilient infrastructure and housing to withstand disruption, absorb disturbance, act effectively in a crisis, and recover quickly afterwards. So this is actually what the point that I want to put forward in linking resilience to disasters and also how we can model the future of construction within that process. To do that, let's actually very quickly revisit the policy context, the disasters and the construction. How can we bring them together under which policy? So very briefly, Sendai framework. I'm hoping that a lot of you are familiar with this, but if not, what happened in 2015 was that recognizing the increasing impact and complexity of disasters and to strengthen risk reduction approach, UN member states actually adopted the Sendai framework in 2015, and it is valid until 2030 at the World Congress on the RR held in Sendai, Japan. That is why it is named as a Sendai framework. And it was actually ratified by the UN General Assembly in June 2015. So these are actually some of the, it is not my intention to go through the framework in quite a bit of detail because that itself is another lecture, but this is actually a snapshot of Sendai framework principles. There is a shift in the framework from disaster management to disaster risk reduction. This is where the construction context actually very much coming in. And also, as I have highlighted here, preparedness to build back better, building better from the start to withstand hazards through proper design and construction. That is actually the point that I want to actually pick up from the Sendai framework, which is directly related to the construction sector. And not only that, I'm sure you all are sort of very familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the no one to be left behind. This was actually adopted in New York in September 2015, with 193 member states signing into that, which actually includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, out of which 2 goals are directly relating to our sector, particularly the goal number 9, which deals with build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. And the next one is the goal number 11, which actually talks about making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. In addition to these global agendas, if I were to take the UK examples, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and Institute of Civil Engineers, the UK, they both have highlighted the need to build first time better and build back better after a disaster. This is actually very much in the agenda. I have actually picked up the UK scenario here. I'm sure in most of the countries, the situation remains the same. And also, there have been a lot of reports being published since Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, highlighting the importance of post-disaster reconstruction. So these are actually 2 reports that I would like to highlight here. And then if you see to move on to the concept of resilient built environment, what does it mean? How does it look like? So this is actually the definition that we actually came up with within our research center. It is actually the design, develop, and manage context-sensitive buildings, spaces, and places which have the capacity to resist or change in order to reduce hazard vulnerability and enable society to continue functioning economically and socially when subjected to a hazard event. It's quite a mouthful, but we just try to capture the key components. So some of the characteristics of the resilient built environment is listed in this particular slide also. For example, it should have the capability to understand hazard threats. It should have the local and external capacity development capabilities. And it needs to be culturally appropriate methods to be used and technologies. And also the infrastructure needs to be protective, and they should be able to sort of retrofit when there's a need. And also there need to be response plans, temporary shelter and services. So this is how I would like to, as a snapshot, want to sort of demonstrate to you the concept of resilient built environment. And some of the characteristics of that is actually the taking both products and the process of the built environment. So you can actually sort of see I would like to actually take this as kind of a system of systems. Of course, the construction is quite important, as you can sort of see in this diagram. But not only that, the developing of the society and the people and the skills development is quite important as well. And also, the next point is actually stimulating the local economy. Local construction industry need to be very strong. And the next point is facilitating the institutional capital. It is about empowerment and decision making, in my view. And also, not only that, the protecting of natural environment is very, very important. For example, from mining and deforestation, and also nurturing, which actually links with promoting social cohesion. So this is how I would like to actually see the resilience of the built environment through products and the processes. It's not only the product of the construction, but it is actually a combination of so many other aspects as well, as I have emphasized in this diagram. But it is easy to say, but there are very, very difficult questions that we need to be dealing with. What scale of challenge should we prepare ourselves for? Okay, let's actually go back to the 2011 tsunami in Japan. So this is actually the Kamaishi port, and you can actually sort of see I have marked the tsunami breakwater. The tsunami breakwater is an offshore structure that restricts the inflow of tsunami and storm waves into a harbor by narrowing the entrance. So we call that sort of a structure as a tsunami breakwater. So in Kamaishi, Japan, breakwater was in the world records in this particular instance as the deepest structure on the planet. The concrete, this was actually done out of concrete. It is actually nearly 207 feet deep and was designed to blunt an incoming tsunami. So this is actually where it is. And this is actually the cross section of the tsunami breakwater, and which was actually costed at 1.6 billion at the time. And this was actually designed to withstand 1 in 200-year tsunami. But the tsunami made short work of it, as you can sort of see in 2011. When a giant tsunami hit Japan's northeast in 2011, the breakwater crumpled under the first 30 feet high wave, leaving Kamashi defenseless without being able to defend, as you can see. Waves deflected from the breakwater are very strong, and it is suspected them having contributed to the 60-foot waves that impacted communities north of it. So it actually had a knock-on effect as well. So if we sort of move on to Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines, the building codes there were constructed to withstand 150 kph design, but the Typhoon Haiyan actually was at 300, almost double. So there are some very difficult questions for us to deal with. How can the construction industry stay ahead of these natural hazards? What scale of challenge should we prepare ourselves for? And also, disaster prevention facility. For example, the previous example I demonstrated, the 2011 tsunami breakwater, whether it was designed for 1 in 200, does it mean that we need to design one for 1 in 1,000 years level earthquake? But having said that, then what is the cost versus effect of that? And also the land use associated with disasters. Should people live in upland? Or then in that sense, the convenience versus safety. So there are a lot of difficult questions that we have to be dealing with in thinking about taking precautions against disasters within the construction sector. So I take it as kind of mainstreaming DRR in construction. That is what we need to be doing. In most of the development initiatives, I think it is fair to say that the option of designing and building to reduce vulnerability of infrastructure to natural hazards has often been ignored. I think it is fair to say that. because of perceived high cost and also perhaps due to lack of appropriate expertise. But having said that, it is very, very important that we actually consider this in view of increasing disaster risks due to growing urbanization and so on and so forth, as I discussed before. So in that sense, I think it is fair to say that it is essential to incorporate DRR principles to the construction sector. But having said that, again, investment decisions. These are actually some of the points that we can always use to highlight the importance of investment. It says that every $1 spent to make existing buildings more resistant to wildfires, earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes, it is said that $6 can be saved in property losses, business interruption, and health problems. And also, in the same vein, it is said that every dollar spent to exceed building codes and make structures more hazard resistant in the future, by doing so, we can save $4. These are small amounts when you can see, but then when you multiply this into millions, you can sort of see the difference. So in that sense, over the next 75 years, these measures could prevent up to about 600 deaths and also 1 million injuries and about 4,000 cases of post-traumatic stress disorders. This is actually was highlighted by the Natural Hazard Mitigation Saves in 2017. So all in all, what it is there need to be changes in order to address these complex challenges associated with resilient building. The role of the built environment professional needs to change. That is what I want to highlight here. Linking with that, in line with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors in the UK, we actually carried out some research, and then we published a report in 2022, Rethinking Construction to Reduce Disaster Risk, a guide for built environment professionals. This was actually done based on all the points that I highlighted before in terms of increasing disaster risk, the case for construction, and how we can actually sort of link the definitions of resilient built environment. So from that, there are some points that we came up with in terms of areas and levels to integrate DRR in the construction sector. So we have actually divided into 5 sections here from the point of view of education, policy perspective, practice, cross-cutting, and research. So if you sort of take very briefly how we can actually integrate DRR in the built environment sector from the point of view of education. Of course, we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. All the stakeholders need to be coming together, and also multi-hazard approach. The time where we have to think about hazards in isolation is long gone. We have to think about holistic approaches in terms of sort of multi-hazard approaches, and also systematic risk, natural hazards occurring at the same time as other hazards. For example, during the COVID pandemic, there have been a lot of natural hazards that we had to face. So we need to be thinking about systematic risk. And also, we need to actually try and address problems from the field by providing localized knowledge and solution to the local context. This is very, very important. It is okay to sort of develop policies at the national level, but the solutions need to be built at the local level. And also, along with that, there is a definite need to update and uptake the built environment professional skills and competencies in DRR. And in order to do that, we can use flexible and customizable education programs. And also sort of, we also can actually develop open education resources. So in that sense, I think it is worth to sort of highlight here I'm aware that CIB, under the leadership of Mark, there is an initiative looking into this aspect of the built environment education, looking into DRR, which I'm very happy to highlight here. And then the next category is actually the policy. So, for example, as you know, there are so many policies around us, and I highlighted two in my talk: the Sendai framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, in addition to that, you have the urban agendas, you have the climate change agreements, and so on and so forth. But it is very, very important that we get a very good and deep understanding of the policy implications, particularly from global to national and to local. And linking with that, what is very, very important is actually policy coherence. Of course, as we know, many countries face disasters and climate risk. But having said that, they haven't got resources and the capacity to deal with these in isolation. So in that sense, due to these constrained resources and the urgency to protect long-term development goals, only a few countries address DRR, climate change adaptation, and the SDGs in an integrated way. Because of that, the policy coherence is very, very important. We really need to be thinking about everything together in an integrated way, rather than taking these various policies in isolation. So if we move on to practice, these are some of the recommendations that I want to actually put forward. For example, built environment professional bodies need to recognize disaster resilience through accreditation. At the moment, it doesn't reflect that clearly or that well. So there's no point of us talking about the importance of these points, but the professional bodies need to recognize and accredit professionals through the accreditation processes. And also, disaster resilience need to be part of professional ethics and standards as part of the overall construction cycle. And also, there need to be regulatory frameworks for reconstruction following large-scale disasters. And as I highlighted before, we need to be thinking outside the box, which is actually the systemic risk approach. In that sense, there is a need for an improved understanding of systematic and cascading risk in all dimensions of exposure, vulnerability, and hazard characteristics, and strengthening disaster risk governance. So this is actually extremely important as far as the practice is concerned for the built environment sector. So next point, from the point of view of research, there's a need for us to understand the audience and devise appropriate dissemination mechanisms for scientific knowledge. This is very, very important. There's no point of us doing, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing blue sky research, we should do them, but having said that, it is important that we understand the audience and devise appropriate mechanisms. And also it is very important that we translate traditional outputs into practical methods that can actually be readily integrated into construction policies and regulations. And also there need to be collaboration across disciplines as well as regionally and internationally. So in that sense, events like this originated in the US, and I'm sitting here in the UK presenting, and of course I can see there are a lot of participants across the globe has actually logged in. So in that sense, collaboration across the globe is extremely important. And also there need to be coordination mechanisms for science, particularly the science-based policy development. The policies just cannot be developed without actually having the scientific input and evidence. And also lastly, the aggregator of knowledge to improve access and focus on quality. So I think it is fair to say the volume of built environment research activity and associate outputs has rapidly increased in the recent past and also in the recent decades. But I think it is fair to say that none more so than relating to DRR and resilient building. So in that sense, there is a gap there for us to actually further improve this aggregator of knowledge in this very important area. And also, we shouldn't forget about the cross-cutting themes here. link research, education, and practice, and also sort of the common language that we all can understand needs to be used. So, in concluding, I suppose these are some of the points that I hope that I managed to actually convey through my talk. Of course, there is growing threat posed by natural and human-induced hazards. But within that, I think this notion of disaster resilience, the future of construction, that I want to actually put forward as one of the solutions. It is easy for us to focus on short-term solutions, but developing a resilient built environment is complex and multidimensional, as we discussed already. And also, sort of, we should take construction of the built environment actually as a combination of a product and a process, rather than taking purely the product perspective. And also, there's a need for the construction industry to work more closely with other stakeholders and to create opportunities for collaboration and for businesses and integrate disaster risk into their management practices. So in doing so, I would like to emphasize the fact that the construction sector must work with governments, non-governmental organizations, and the public to improve policy and drive the development of more resilient and sustainable cities. Those are in very brief terms, those are the key messages that I hope that you will be able to take home with you from this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amaratunga. This was very informative and very nicely done. I appreciate very much you bringing together the various needs of construction industry in terms of what improvements we need to make. So let me open the floor for questions. And as always, I cannot see everybody, so please open your mic and ask a question. I'm trying to monitor on my screen here. Okay, so while you're all thinking about your questions, let me open the conversation. Professor Amaratunga, you started off by talking about the Turkey earthquake and some of the other major disasters that we have seen in the recent past, and particularly, you were focusing on the quality of construction and the pace of redevelopment. And I was wondering, what through your research and in your thoughts could be done to enforce code compliance and in the construction industry, and what type of changes do you think we need to consider, and not only in the US or UK, but throughout the world, as you mentioned, that we have resilient infrastructure and the built environment.
Yeah, I suppose is a very, very good point, actually, Mark. Really speaking, I suppose getting back to this fundamental point about accreditation, in my view, I think at the moment, I think the construction industry is on one side, and then the impact of disasters on the other side. I just don't see a kind of a very strong link between the two. So because of that, I suppose the construction industry professionals need to actually consider the impact of disasters, and then to do the design planning and the entire building construction cycle in incorporating those into their systems. But having said that, I think there need to be some form of an accountability process. I think this is the lesson that we can actually learn from the Turkey earthquake. Who is accountable for failures? Who is accountable for not adhering to building codes? Really speaking, again, these are all linked to the governance of the sector. What are sort of governance arrangements are there? I think there's a lot to be done in that area, Mark, in linking the construction sector with the DRR policies and practices in making the sector more resilient to disasters. So really speaking, the governance and accountability is very, very important, but I haven't actually seen anything of that sort coming up as yet, but I'm hoping behind the back of Turkey earthquake, there will be more work in this area, including the accreditation of contractors from the point of view of DRR practices. I think that can well be a good starting point in my view.
I quite agree, and it's not only going to help in the DRR sector, but in the general safety and compliance throughout the industry as well. Let me see. Well, the floor is open. Anybody has question to ask, please open your mic and go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, Manush, go ahead, please.
Presentation. I have two questions. First of all, a few years ago, I remember that I read some books. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear my voice. And
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you, yes.
a few years ago, I read some books about earthquake design, and one of the methods suggested for earthquake, for example, was to incorporate symmetry into the building design, such as positioning the columns, walls. But despite all of the policies that you also mentioned, we are still witnessing a preference and higher demand for aesthetic architectural design over earthquake safety. My question is that how can the required standards be incorporated and give earthquake considerations the first priority, especially in areas with a higher risk of earthquake or on fault lines, for example? And also, my second question is that in populated cities, the urban design hinder evacuation effort during especially emergencies. So what can be done for these existing buildings and the current, for example, design of the, for example, cities, towns, and etc. Thank you.
Yeah, if I sort of get your questions correctly, I think first of all about about designing and constructing buildings to withstand earthquakes. Again, as I highlighted, it is very, very resource intensive. I think in particularly in the developing world, I think what is happening is I suppose a lot of tenders are given based on the lowest cost. So in that sense, that is actually a dilemma, as I highlighted in my talk. How can we actually manage between the cost versus cost versus quality versus and the outcome? The cost benefit analysis is quite an important point here. So in that sense, I think it is easier for us to say that we need to be designing better, but then having said that, the cost associated with that it could well be enormous. So then having that balance is, I suppose, is not easy. It's quite easy for us to sort of say it is important, but in terms of putting that into practice, it is not very, very easy. So I haven't got an answer to that in that sense. But having said that, the examples from Turkey and comparing to the examples from Japan, I think you can actually sort of see the difference. Whereas in Japan, a lot of buildings actually do withstand the earthquakes, but whereas in Turkey we saw what happened. So in that sense, in my view, I think one of the more the important criteria here is resources, but not only that, again the accountability and the governance issue comes in, whether these things are regulated in different countries. So that is actually the my view on your first question. And the second question is, I suppose, the urbanization and the humanitarian response, if I got your question correctly. But again, that is why I suppose it is very, very important that we do the kind of scenario mapping and to sort of do drills in terms of sort of, particularly for cities which actually are situated near on fault lines. What sort of evacuation plans that we can actually do in an event of an earthquake. So those things actually can be modeled, and I know particularly in the US cities, they do have these plans, and also in Japan, and also in some parts of Indonesia. So these things can be, we call it preparedness planning. So preparedness planning is extremely important in facing and finding solutions to these sort of situations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manas. Those are very good questions. Anybody else wants to go next? I see many names in the audience that are working in disaster risk reduction. So please open your mic and ask a question if you have.
Okay, I have a contribution.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm just saying that the rethinking construction to reduce disaster risk is a very important issue, because we are in a global village. There may be areas where there are disaster risk, like Turkey, like happened in Turkey, and I am in Ghana. I lost a friend who died in Turkey, in the earthquake in Turkey. So you may be far away from what is happening, but because of travel, easy travel, and then people travel for conferences, for many things, you will be affected by a disaster which is happening in a very far place, or a place where you really don't think about. So I just wanted to say that the rethinking construction to reduce disaster risk is quite an important thing to study and to prepare for. Thank you.
Thank you. That is indeed
Thank you very
true.
much. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, Dilanthi, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think it is actually quite an important point that he highlighted. So I think I fully agree with that point. Really speaking, I have nothing new to add. I think what he highlighted is quite true.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes. So thank you, Professor, for this presentation. My question is that did any company contacted you regarding this research, or did you collaborated with any company? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of sort of finding solutions that I described at the end, of course, we actually collaborated with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors in the UK. So they are one of the largest construction professional professional institutions in the world, as you're probably aware, and also I think it has sort of membership from consultants, contractors, and so on and so forth. So we actually collaborated with them, and through them, we actually got the construction industry and the contractors and so on and so forth input in carrying out the research. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Well, questions? Anybody? All right. While you all are thinking about your second round of questions, let me put in my question here. So, Dilanthi, one of the things that we talk about, when we talk about resilience, it really also depends on availability of funds and the capacity of a community to build capacity.
Yeah.
So the question is that, what is your opinion of what poor communities or lesser endowed communities and countries can do in terms of building their capacity and thereby building their resilience?
I suppose that really speaking, you're right, Mark. The capacity building should start at the community level. So really speaking, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who actually face the disasters rather than actually the policymakers who are sitting in offices at the national level. So developing their capacities is really important. So in that sense, I suppose the preparedness planning and then the early warning. That is actually very important. I think this year the UN slogan is actually early warning save lives. So in that sense, I think it is really important there are proper early warning mechanisms at the local level, so that people they'll actually get to know if there's going to be a disaster and so on and so forth. Again, from the perspective of multi-hazards also. So I think in that sense, I think capacity building at the ground level is really important. But having said that, a lot of countries actually face a lot of issues, because again, here we are talking about capacity building towards disaster risk reduction. But a lot of countries sadly see this as an additional expense or investment rather than allocating funds for those. There's a lot of fundings being diverted to response and to sort of other activities. So of course, indeed, Mark, the resources is very much an issue. But having said that, a lot of countries are doing as much as they can in terms of sort of increasing the capacity at the local level by means of particularly drills. For example, relating to tsunamis, every 2 years there are sort of global drills are being held, so that people will not forget about how they need to be responding and so on and so forth. Those are some other sort of very easy sort of, or cost-effective, I must say, procedures that can actually take place at the local level from the point of view of increasing their capacities. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dilanthi. Questions? I cannot see everybody, so you have to open your mic and go ahead and ask your questions again, please. Anybody has a pressing question?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay,
All right,
if there's
well,
no question, let me ask you a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I just want to ask, this field of disaster preparedness, is it civil engineering? Is it for the valuer or the surveyor? Is it for the whose profession? Where does it really fall in the field of construction professionals? If you want to study this particular topic, where does it really fall? Or which area does it fall in? I just want to ask this question.
So did you capture it, Mark? I couldn't hear him properly. So
Coach, could you please repeat that question?
can you
don't
repeat
mind.
it, please?
Sorry, my question is, this field of disaster preparedness, which field of study is it? For example, let's say, for example, University of Huddersfield, is it civil engineering? Is it building surveying? Or which group of professionals spend time to study disaster risk and preparedness for it?
Oh, it's very much multidisciplinary approach. I think we really shouldn't be actually thinking about that the problem belongs to either only to civil engineers or to architects and so on and so forth. We all have a role to play. So it's very much, this field is very much a kind of an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary aspect. And that is why I suppose we are working with the medics, the historians, the social scientists, engineers, and so on and so forth, because everybody has a role to play. Yes.
Yes, Ebenezer, go ahead, please.
Okay. Sorry, my background is a little bit noisy, but let me, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. My question is, in a country where you really don't have a history of disaster, is it really something to worry about in designs? For example, in Nigeria, we hardly have a natural disaster like that, but again, we're open up to the rest of the world through the oceans and the like. Should it be something we should be worried about from now, or should we have to be waiting for the first surprise to happen before we begin to react? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. I think preparing preparedness for any hazard is actually won't be a waste. So in that sense, I think being prepared to face any sort of situations, instances and circumstances will only sort of give you benefit. So in that sense, I don't think that none of us should wait until the next disaster strikes. I think we really need to be thinking about those and try and take some precautions if at all possible. Yes.
Thank you, Ebenezer. I think that's a very important question for perhaps many who are in the audience coming from different parts of the world. Any other question? So, Dilanthi, while people are thinking about a good question to ask, let me ask my question. So, I wanted to follow up from my previous question about availability of funds and so on. Another problem that we have noticed is that convincing regulatory agencies or funding agencies that expenditure in capacity building is important becomes often a challenge. What are your thoughts on, or what have you seen to be working in terms of convincing regulators that yes, it may be 1 in 100 event, but you need to get prepared now? And just building upon what Ebenezer was saying also earlier about disasters and preparation.
Yes, I think it's that that convincing process is not easy, Mark. I suppose it's very, very, as we all know, the lot of funding is diverted towards the response rather than the risk reduction or the preparedness front. And because, of course, we can actually sort of see why, and because when the cameras are around, people are very much happy to sort of give away things and so on and so forth. But whereas disaster risk reduction, you just don't see that because everything is happening actually behind the scenes. So in that sense, there is this dilemma between how can we actually sort of convince the regulatory authorities and investors to invest more. But again, we have actually at the moment, it is actually a study that we are doing at our university in terms of maybe incentive schemes. That is actually a possibility. And also sort of in terms of working with insurance companies, so that to say that if they have incorporated DRR principles into their designs, maybe that the insurance premiums can be lower than the typical figure. So again, that's I just gave you as just one example. So incentive schemes actually could work in that front, and particularly relating to insurance. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have just about a minute or so left. So any further questions, anybody? All right, then let me take that opportunity to ask my last question. And so, Dilanthi, as you know, we have proposed, and we work in the interdisciplinarity of infrastructure, and we have proposed, 7 different layers of infrastructure that one needs to be looking at. So, civil, civic, social, environmental, educational, financial, and cyber, and how resilience in one is important as well as resilience in the other for a community to be truly resilient. So with that said, and you touched upon a lot of those issues as well. So I wanted to build upon that. You brought up a very important point about how do we rethink construction and what construction industry needs to do to reduce disasters. But what can the community do in the meantime to what type of capacity building do you think the community needs to be thinking about that would safeguard and make them more resilient and not necessarily have to rely on policies or construction industry in the meantime?
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. I think that actually will give people a quick win, particularly at the community level, Mark. I suppose particularly, I think looking into the to historical data, I think that and the traditional indigenous knowledge. I think that is actually a major input at the local level. So particularly, I suppose, if you take the Indian Ocean tsunami in some countries, of course, with the direction of and the strength of the wind, they apparently, and also the direction of travel of various birds, they knew apparently what was coming. So likewise, but that sort of local knowledge, capturing that sort of local knowledge is really important. So going by the traditional thinking, historical knowledge, and also sort of like oral histories, those are some of the things that can easily be done at the community level at very minimal cost. I think that is something that we really need to be promoting, and also sort of in terms of sort of nature-based solutions. So again, the local communities know better than the policymakers about how the nature can be used or inspired to provide solutions in meeting or safeguarding infrastructure, particularly in coastal areas, for example, with mangroves and so on and so forth. So really speaking, that local knowledge, emphasizing and working on the local knowledge, oral histories, and the historical records is something that can be done at a minimal cost, but with great results. Yes.
Well, with that said, thank you very much, Professor Amaratunga. This has been a wonderful, knowledgeable presentation. Truly appreciate you taking time. I know it's getting late in the evening in the UK.
Friday evening as well,
thanks.
yes.
And then Friday evening as well. So
Yeah.
double thanks for that. And I want to thank all the audience for signing in as well, and really appreciate folks coming from all over the world to listen to some of these important presentations. So with that said, let's give a big round of applause to Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga and thank you profusely. Please open
Thank
your
you.
mics if you like, and thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. And
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to seeing you and also sort of maybe to sort of take this work forward and to sort of see what else we can do and what are the next steps.
Yes, absolutely. We're looking
Thank you
forward
very
to
much.
you visiting
Yeah.
us as well.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye,
you.
everybody. Have a good weekend, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.